He'll give me this. He'll give me the signal. Welcome to the Competitive Advantage Talks brought to you by the Craft Analytics Group. I'm Chris Tinsley. I'm a student here at MIT, and it's my pleasure to introduce this talk, Using Google Cloud to Take Sports Analytics to the Next Level, sponsored by Google Cloud. Just a bit of word on logistics. This panel will run for 25 minutes, including 5 minutes of Q&A. Please wait until you have the microphone to ask a question. And with that, I'll leave it to Alec Patani.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming by. So my name is Alok. I'm a data science advocate at Google Cloud. What does that mean? It means that I'm a data scientist by trade, and I talk about how to use Google Cloud, for data science use cases. My background is in sports analytics. I was a founding member of the ESPN Sports Analytics team, worked there on projects like the Total Quarterback Rating, Football Power Index. Then I was a data scientist at Google. Now I work in Google Cloud Data Science with some sports projects, which we'll talk about. So what is Google Cloud? This is a question I asked myself when I joined a little bit over a year ago. And I think the simplest way I can put it is a combination of hardware and software tools that allow you to do things. So same infrastructure that internally Google uses to run Google Search, YouTube, and other successful products like that. You can imagine the scale of those products, right? This is the same infrastructure that is now available to other people, other companies and people to run their stuff on. From a data science perspective, what does it mean? We get insights from data faster, simply. So we'll show some examples of that. Sports. Google Cloud has many partnerships, and including some in sports, because sports is not only a really good place to kind of learn to use data and to demonstrate value, but also these sports enterprises have data problems, technologies, things they want to work on. So some of our partners, NCAA has been a multi-year partnership, working a lot with their basketball data to help both the basketball committees and also for some public-facing work, which I've been very involved in. Golden State Warriors, also again, some sports analytics pieces, but also a much bigger partnership around the Chase Center in San Francisco, sponsorship there. MIT Sports Lab, local partnership. They have a really good group led by Pekka Hosoi and Christina Chase, where students work on data-driven projects across, working with other organizations, and we help them with sort of cloud computing and sort of resources in that realm. Bottom right is the FA in England, another big partnership where we will help them with soccer, or as they would call it, football performance data. And we'll talk a little bit more about one example of that at the end here. And the latest partnership, which was just announced a couple days ago with Major League Baseball, really exciting. I'm not sure how many of you saw the panel earlier today, but went through some really cool use cases about how Major League Baseball and Google Cloud are going to work together to really bring forward the next generation of baseball. Okay, so in the title of this talk, I said the next level. You're here. Presumably, you've been involved in sports analytics or are aware of it. It's been going on for a while. This conference is in its 14th year. So what is the next level? And again, try to keep it simple here. I think you can talk about at least three things. One is doing things at scale. So what does that mean? We do what we do, but we do it bigger or we do it faster, right? We used to have game-by-game data. Now we have play-by-play data. Now we have player tracking data. How can we do bigger things and kind of keep without spending too much time on it? Making things easier, right? So I do the same thing that I do now, but I want to do it simpler because it's only one part of my job, and now I got to put it into a bigger workflow. Or maybe I have this level of technical skill, and to get all the way here is a little hard. How can I make it easier? And then the last category, which is maybe the more fun sort of aspirational things, is how can we do new things we never could do before? Is video data? I wouldn't have said so a few years ago, but now I think you're starting to see that it can be. Okay, so the first topic, doing things at scale. So there's multiple Google Cloud tools, right? And I'm not going to go through all of them because I would be here forever. But one that is really good for doing things at scale is BigQuery. So what is BigQuery? It's our enterprise data warehouse for analytics. Essentially, like you can store as much data as you want here in relational database things and use SQL, which many of you will be familiar with if you're data analysts, to query tons of data, to do all sorts of things that you might not imagine doing on data sets of up to petabytes. And the other things that are kind of unique about it are we have the ability to incorporate streaming data and as well as to do machine learning right in the database. I should also mention the BI engine allows for dashboarding and stuff. This is a tool that I personally like a lot. I like to build my stuff in BigQuery and then display it in a dashboard without like building some fancy website or something. I just want something that's available. People can kind of filter, sort, look at some graphs. BI engine makes it so that you can build that dashboard, and it's using BigQuery's backend to be really fast. If I have 1 million rows or something, no problem. All right, so that was the sort of generic BigQuery slide, but let's talk about a real problem. So we want to analyze player tracking data. Some of you will be familiar with the NBA player tracking data. Others will be a little less familiar. SportView initially and then Second Spectrum has provided tracking data for the NBA 25 times a second, the ball and the players, the entire time during play, right? So we have this data for about 6 seasons, and the idea here is like it's really hard to work with this data, right? But we can do 2 things. One step I'm going to thank my colleague Ramsey, who's sitting here for, which is that he used Dataflow to get it into BigQuery. I'm going to pick up there and say we have our player tracking data in BigQuery. But we still have a huge table. So if you look up at the top right, the table size is 1.6 terabytes, right? This is 7 seasons of data, 6 or 7 seasons, sorry. And it has 8,000 games roughly with about 900,000 rows per game. So that ends up being 7 billion rows. Usually you don't query 7 billion rows. You just don't. But in BigQuery you can. So to kind of demonstrate this, I wanted to ask a question that, isn't maybe the highest level research question, isn't going to win the research papers competition here, but is something kind of along the lines of what you might think about asking with player tracking data. So, and I wanted to use the whole set. So which pair of players have been closest to each other when they're on the court together over all the data we have? So that's a question we're going to ask. So how do we answer it? Some people may know SQL and some people don't. I'm a technical person, so we have SQL on the slide, right? So the idea here is, again, laid out here with the text. What we do is you look at every player on every frame who's on the court, and I calculate the distance between me and every other player, and we do that for all pairs of players. And then, again, we aggregate them, and we look at 2 metrics. One is the percent of time that they're within 5 feet of each other, right? So that's like pretty close, and we'll count that. And otherwise, we'll do an average of the separation. And we calculate the separation using this Euclidean distance formula that you might have learned in like geometry class. And then we filter by, make sure that it's a certain number of minutes, and then we'll sort on this, okay? So I don't, this is not, like people come from different technical backgrounds. I don't think this is like by any means the most complicated query, but it takes a little bit of work. And the point isn't the SQL, the point is how fast it runs. So how fast do we think? We're going to run this query over 6 to 7 years of data. How fast do you think this will run? Okay. So I think when I asked this in a different presentation, someone said hours. And I think I would have said hours, like a year ago. So I don't have the live demo, but it runs. So first we'll look at the actual basketball answer. So Andre Drummond and Hassan Whiteside are the 2 players who sharing the court for at least 250 minutes close to each other. You can see some pictures here. Kind of makes sense. They're both big guys. They don't really stretch the floor, and they probably guard each other on both ends. Actually, everyone in the top 10 is pairs of centers who are not really that, at least in the time of this data set, like moving around that much. So it makes sense. I didn't think about it this way, but it kind of comes out this way. So that's the interesting basketball nugget. Again, like you would want to do more here to make this a really interesting thing. But here's the part that was interesting to me. So this query ran about a minute. process 672 gigabytes of data. Again, I would do this live, and if you want, I have my laptop and we'll do it. It's a little bit, this wasn't exactly the best setup for me to do it, but happy to show people that this does actually run in a minute. So that's amazing, right? So I asked a reasonably interesting question, and we got results in a minute. That's what we're talking about, doing things bigger, doing things faster. Okay, so the next thing, BigQuery ML. So BigQuery, again, database product, you're used to writing database queries, things you can execute, sort of like all sorts of join operations and filtering, not necessarily modeling, right? So one of the things that BigQuery's team has tried to work on is a way to operationalize machine learning within a database to make it easier for those who maybe don't have R or Python skills to do models. So this allows you to execute machine learning models without moving the data from BigQuery. You see the list of available models there. Again, it's not every single model. There's tons that aren't included. They're obviously working on others, but there's some of the ones that are like kind of fundamental. I come from a statistics background. I think you can do a lot with linear regression, logistic regression, and k-means. You don't necessarily need the most sophisticated deep neural nets. They have those too. But the key is, you'll see the little GIF that's running. Like, that's the code you need to fit this model. It's a couple lines of SQL, and it will automatically handle a bunch of these things. So learning rate, splitting into training and test, imputation, you can do regularization. Again, if these things are a little bit fuzzy to you, don't worry about it. The point being, you can do some fairly technical stuff without having to, again, move your big data out of BigQuery and like writing a whole bunch of custom code. So again, we'll look at an example. In this case, we'll stick with basketball. We'll go college basketball. So this is data from Genius Sports, who collects some play-by-play data for the NCAA the last couple of years. We're talking about play-by-play, so not quite the size of what we just did with the player tracking data. It's only 780,000 field goal attempts. And we have the last 2 seasons, let's say, for men's basketball. And you can see an example from last year's national title game of the type of data we're looking at. We have some coordinates. We have some distance that we calculate from the shot distance, where it is, and whether the shot was made or not. So this is this is stuff we've had for a long time, shot chart type of data. But I just wanted to show kind of a familiar question, how can we answer it with BigQuery ML? So our questions in this case will be, who takes the highest value shots in the field, and who makes the best shots? So there are more sophisticated ways of doing this, certainly in the NBA with the tracking data. But let's take a shot at this with college basketball using shot location data. All right. So again, we're going to show the code, hopefully not super intimidating, and we'll show some of the results. So top left is the create model statement. So I say create model, give me logistic regression, give me some regularization. Here are the features I want, and shot made is a label. So that's basically all I have to type in to create a model that will predict if a shot will go in or not based on the distance. And then when it runs, it will give you this output on the bottom left where it gives you some accuracy stuff and some metrics on log loss. This is a slightly better model than assuming the average of 43. It's more than slightly, I should say, 43% makes in the data set. And again, it's not intended to be the most sophisticated model. It's intended to basically give an idea if I control for shot distance and where on the court the shot came from, how hard is it to make. You'll see on the right, if I want to explore the weights of this model, sort of the coefficients in the traditional sense, you have this ability to basically select the weights, and it will give them to you in this sort of table form. I pointed out a few that are important. Shot distance, the further it goes, less likely it is to go in. That's obvious. They have some area and distance are kind of correlated here. Again, this isn't a perfect causal model, but at least gets the idea of controlling for these things. And I have another feature for if it's the final 3 seconds of the half, which means they're usually chucking it up. Okay. So my question was, who takes the best shots and then who makes those shots more than they should based on the quality, right? So that is another step beyond here. The key part here is, again, what I've highlighted. You can use a predict statement to then, again, apply the model you just created to this table and get predicted values for the shot. And then the next part is just some stuff I did to incorporate that one, the value of a three-pointer and other things, right? So we see here there's the 5 shots that we had looked at before. You get the probability of the shot made. Obviously, some shots are much harder than others based on distance. And then the expected value of a shot depends on if it's that probability as well as if it's a 2 or a 3. So we get a value, expected value of the shot, and then we'll compare it to if they actually made it or not. Okay, so now we're basically there. Now we just have to aggregate across all shots, kind of like the last thing, and filter. So we did a minimum of 300 field goals attempts in a season. This is college data, last 2 seasons, and we looked at the highest average expected shot value. So who takes the shots that are most likely to go in based on distance? Some familiar names here: John Morant, Zion, top 2 picks in the previous draft, Obi Toppin this year, Precious from Memphis, he's a good player. And then the next set is basically the highest average expected points versus expected. So given how hard of shots you take, how often do you convert them more or less? Again, you see Zion. So what this tells you is that Zion Williamson is good at putting the ball in the basket. And he does things like this. So this is not, this hopefully at least is confirmatory that this makes some sense, because we all know that Zion's good. But what else? Do we see another player who's on both of them and also takes good value shots and makes them? Obi Toppin. So this is a little, if you're a college basketball fan, you know who this person is. But this is kind of interesting. Like he's maybe a player of the year in his conference, but I didn't know he was that good. And then I looked, and he's also capable of doing some awesome stuff. So again, not the most super sophisticated analysis, but the type of question we can answer, and with minimal code, we're able to get to this type of result very fast. So let's move on to the last section here. So enabling new things. So we have a bunch of different tools at Google Cloud, AutoML and APIs, where auto machine learning, basically. So Google has a bunch of really smart people working on machine learning tools, and then eventually they move into Google Cloud as customer-facing products. And the idea is not that you write the most complicated code to do your machine learning, but just that you can leverage it sort of a application interface, such that you can just say, do the thing, and they'll do all the complicated stuff and return the result you want. So we're going to go through an example of that using cloud video intelligence. Okay, so we talked about the partnership with the FA. As a part of that, at the next conference in UK last November, there was a football peer demo. So football in the UK is what we call soccer. And over there, they were basically what was set up, and a bunch of my colleagues were there, including Ramsey, I mentioned earlier. And they set up this pitch, this penalty kick area. And you're taking basically a standard soccer penalty kick, except you have these 2 targets, no goalie. And you're just trying to hit those 2 targets, and you're getting points for 3 things. 1 is accuracy, so how close you are to the target. 2 for power, so kind of how fast it gets there. And 3 for style, which was a little bit more subjective, but how you kind of look. So we'll get into that in a sec. So they had the whole demo here, and we're happy to talk about this more. I'm going to gloss over a bunch of details, was 3 pixel phones. Right, so there's 1 focused on the camera, 1 focused on the goal, 1 on the side, and 1 on the kicker. So we're going to talk about the kicker value. So what happened here is about 1,400 people 500 people took about 3 kicks each, so 1,500 kicks. We had video uploaded. And then the idea wasn't just to look at the videos, right? That doesn't do me much, but turn it into actionable insights. So again, this is a new thing. This is not a thing, at least in sort of traditional data science, where you're like, oh, I have videos, what do I do with them? Maybe I watch and I'll record some things and then I'll turn that into data. This video intelligence API with a new feature that I think is going to come out very soon called pose detection, which others have talked about. Neil Johnson of ESPN just did a great presentation about it. But this is the Google version of pose detection. We'll basically take a video and say, not only where was the person in the whole video, but where were all 17 of his limbs. So the point here isn't what the code says. It's that it's an amount of code that basically says, tell me where the video is, tell me where you want it to go, and then I'll just say, please give me pose. And then it turns this video with minimal sort of coding into what you see there, which is a bounding box for the person, and then for 17 joints on the person, where their XY and where the XY is of their shoulders, elbows, all these sorts of things, with a confidence value as well. So you can get some idea of hey, this might be very accurate versus a little less so. So this is pretty. When I tried this out, I was like, wow. I program in Python some, but I'm not an expert here. But without really understanding, I can get the things I want to get out of this. And then we'll go one more step and turn it into insights. So if we take the output from the data across all the kicks, we can then put it back into BigQuery, which we talked about earlier, and then we could do some sort of similarity scoring algorithm to find unique kicker movements. So what I did was, like, I didn't watch all 1,500 videos, but I wanted to see some interesting ones. So I put all the data into BigQuery with the help of my colleagues, of course. And then I sorted by the similarity score, and I found the one that was like kind of more unique, and I went through the top few. So this one came up, and I was like, oh, this is kind of different. So the guy does a little shimmy, comes up, rotates his hip, and does a kick. All the other ones are pretty standard penalty kicks, right? So if I'm interested in finding some interesting, different poses, this type of thing allows me to do it in an automated way. We also track the ball. I'm going to skip over this, AutoML Vision, and now we have actually a shot chart basically for every kick, and then you can highlight the individual players. So I did want to leave time for questions. So basically want to say Google Cloud makes things, allows you to scale, do things easily, and allows you to do all sorts of things, including a bunch of new things. So with that, I'll leave you with one other video of our colleague Polong doing, this was another one that came up as a very unique kick. And yeah, I'm here. This is where you contact me. Happy to take questions here. And if you want to run queries or get Google Cloud stickers, I'll be outside afterwards.
Hey, hello. I noticed you said it was like 7 billion rows, and then it processed about 600 gigabytes. Was that the entire data set, or was it only processing some of the data?
Yeah, good question. So in theory, I start with the entire data set. BigQuery is, like, the reason it's fast is all these optimizations. So behind the scenes, it might be taking some of the filters I had, passed them up, and then said, I think it said it processed 600, and the whole thing was 1.6. So I think it ends up passing some of them back and maybe like understanding that it doesn't need to use exactly every single frame. But I wrote it as if it was going to, I didn't write it as to like only take one season or something. So.
And is that also potentially like skipping the columns that aren't relevant?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. Did you look at the cost of like one of those queries? Or, I mean, I'm sure you're not charged for it, but we might be.
Yeah, no, great question. Yeah, so I think, like, yes, obviously it costs money and to run these queries. I think the way that BigQuery pricing works, again, I'm not a salesperson, is that you can buy like a fixed amount, like you can pay up for whatever amount, and then you run whatever each individual one's cost doesn't matter. This one is on the order of, I would say, cents to dollars. So that's a huge query though. Like, you wouldn't, if you run it once, you're probably okay. You probably don't want to set some automation to run that every 2 minutes, right? So like that's a different story. But yeah, I think it's, you pay for how much data you process. I think the rates are pretty good, and then there's ways to definitely put in cost controls and things. So.
Is the posed estimation for like objects in addition to just people?
Pose estimation is for people. Object detection, which I skipped over a little bit for the ball, is for like objects like a ball. Like, it'll tell you where it is. Yeah.
But not the well, a ball doesn't have much orientation, but right. Like a robot has poses as well.
Yeah, I haven't. In theory, you could just put something in and it might say, yeah, like the robot has like limbs or whatever. But it's it's trying to pick up on like what is generally, like using artificial intelligence, what is a person and where would I map them? Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Cool. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Check. 1, 2, 2, 2, 2. Check. 1. I know now. That was you. Go ahead. Check. 1, 2. Two, 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 1, 2, 2, 1. Check. 1, 2. Two, two, hey, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2. Check. 1, 2, 2. 2, 1, 2, 2. Check. Check. 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2. Check. 1, 2, 2. No. What's going on? Something just went. Listen, 2. It was perfect. Hey, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2. Check. 2, 2, 2, 2. Check. 2, 2, 1, 2, 2. This handheld is useless right now. Even when I go flat, it sounds like crap.
Grab a different one.
I don't have another one programmed. One, two, two. Right? That's what I'm saying. 2. Check. 1, 2, 2. Like, how bizarre is that, right? Yeah, I'll set the EQ again. 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2. Check. 2, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2. Check. 1, 2, 2.
They keep these prompts. Yeah, that's true. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Competitive Advantage Talks brought to you by the Craft Analytics Group. I'm Chris Tinsley. I'm a student here at MIT, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's talk at the intersection of AI and human potential. For those of you just coming in, just a reminder on Q&A, it'll be reserved for the last 5 minutes, and please wait to ask a question until you have the microphone. And with that, I'll hand it off to Daphne Aronson.
Thank you. Hello. All right. Appreciate everyone choosing to share your time with me today. My name is Daphne Aronson. I am the founder of Be Sports Minded. I am a sports psych consultant and performance analytics expert. So often when we think of sports analytics, we're considering new ways to identify and slice the data that's like that found on the back of a trading card. And I'm focused on what's on the front, who that person is, and understanding if, why, and how they will be successful in a given environment. Today I'm going to share with you some results from my machine learning platform that allows you to identify the intangibles without ever needing to administer an assessment. It will tie directly to business outcomes, and the competitive advantage in this case is giving your scouts an edge and a leg up in the work that they do. KPMG valued Man U at $3.8 billion, not the least of which goes into understanding and identifying the talent and the coaches for the team. A common refrain in Premier League and also in MSL is we've got so much data right now, we really have to understand how to better sift through the noise. So often, the off the field, those intangibles, gets overlooked if measured at all. Major League Baseball is arguably the Nike of sports analytics, yet it continues to find itself in the hole when it comes to understanding and tying the behavior and the personalities of their athletes to any real business outcomes and driving decisions. Consider first-round draft picks of the NFL, 78% of them might make it on the field. 20% end up staying in the league for 10 years or are starters for 5. A common refrain from those GMs is we lose 3 things that we can't recover with those draft busts. The first is the time that the scouts spend on those athletes. And while there are resources and monies associated with that, it's not always hitting the salary cap. However, that's the second thing. Right now you've given money to this player who's not producing and it's hitting your salary cap, and that's not available to you for other acquisitions and trades. And the third is the value of that draft that could have gone to somebody who was going to produce for you. The NCAA has been on this precipitous rise in the recruiting expenditures. Just from fiscal year 18 to 19, the Power 5 NCAA football teams have increased the recruiting by $103,500. So that's taken a team like Georgia over the $3.6 million mark, while at the other end you've got teams like Wisconsin who continue to do more with less. Similarly, on the basketball side, the average increase from fiscal year 18 to 19 was $57,000, with the SEC leading most of that charge. Consider that a late first-round draft pick in the NHL is actually closer in value to a third-round draft pick than he is to one of the first 5. So you're seeing also a very similar range in investment in scouts in the NHL teams. You've got teams who are heavily invested in advanced technologies and have 22 scouts to work with. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have teams that are working with under 10 scouts and are relying on shared resources. And finally, the NBA. They, in 2019-2020, they gave about $123.5 million secured to salaries, with accumulated about $50 million to drafts after the 10th round. So there's a lot of money, there's a lot of emphasis going out in there, but there's a problem. Problem is we're not looking at the qualitative who these players are, and there are reasons why, and these are the 3 reasons in my research that I've discovered. You've got false positives coming from the current assessments and technologies that are out there now. So it's monkey see, monkey do adoption, right? One team has it, so now you want to have it for your team too. It's not reliable predictive analytics that can tie to any real business outcome. And you're also understanding that there's gaming. a lot of it is reliant on self-reporting, and that self-reporting, these athletes are sitting across from you or they're taking these assessments. They already know what the answers are. They know how they're supposed to answer it. Similarly, on the interview side, there's just unconscious bias and bias that's going into how the answers are being reported. When we talk about unreliable psychometrics, we're looking at the field in general. The research has demonstrated that, yes, in the past, we currently rely on self-reporting, but self-reporting really lacks internal validity, and it has a lot of bias inherently. So it's because it was the only thing we had up until this point that we're using it, but it's not really a reliable tool. And systemic inefficiencies, what we're talking about here is a lot of low-hanging fruit, and we often miss it because we're too busy looking at the big picture. So that's considering the different levels of skills in your scouts, understanding if you're all on the same page when it comes to what you're identifying, the definition of those character traits, and really the consistency of your reporting metrics. So what that leads to is selecting certain players whose personalities aren't really understood, identified, or assessed, and so their performance profiles allow overlooking those red flags. Instead, we'd love to understand how we can better identify these late-round draft picks who completely exceeded expectations on any of their scouting reports and their draft round. So if we're saying that the self-reporting interviews aren't great, but we still really think that there's value in understanding who athletes are as people, how are we going to do this? And that's where machine learning comes in. So machine learning is a sublayer of AI. It's where machines actually learn to problem solve themselves. And I think this is sort of why we got into this catchy phrase of predictive analytics. In this case, we're using natural language and IBM Watson Glaser technology to scrape the internet for any written or spoken words by the athletes. That's by the athletes, not about the athletes from other people. And it reveals the personality traits based on the big 5 personality traits. The acronym is OCEAN. It's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. That's the field standard. If you're using AIQ, if you're using an NEO, if you're using PI, all of that filters up into these 5 standards that is stable from the age of 12. So even if you're out there recruiting younger athletes and you're determined that you can accentuate their performance over time, but you're not really sure because their brains aren't developed yet if they're really going to be able to express these character traits and keep motivated and not become complacent and handle the adversity, this is the way to go. It also gives us back their problem-solving capability as well as a culture map. IBM Watson Glaser, natural language, those are technologies available to everybody. That's not patentable. What we have patent pending are the neurotransmitters between the algorithms that yield more precise results, as well as the problem solving and the culture map. So what we're seeing here is if you have your talent pool, and each dot represents one of the athletes that you're interested in looking at, right, just going through the machine learning platform immediately reduces the number of athletes that your scouts have to target. So right away, you're not only gaining that time back, you're actually adding time for expediting their outreach and actually targeting players that matter so they can actually learn more about them and get the right amount of data about their qualitative and quantitative expertise. Now, that's just on the machine learning. If you now incorporate what some of the amazing R&D applications, whether it's models that you've built internally or you're using one of the solution providers outside, you can actually go even deeper to say, all right, who are real franchise players? And in these later rounds where it barely seems like there's a needle left in the haystack to explore, who might be a culture add and have the ability to actually exceed the expectations from those scouting reports. So here's a demonstration of the technology live using user input. What we did was actually create the benchmarks off of the GOATs throughout the sports, male and female. And what's awesome about the technology is that it doesn't see gender, race, age, education. So it completely is inclusive. It takes out that diversity measure. And it allows you to filter on either what you want the standards to be or what are the benchmarks that are currently out there. So when we looked at the GOATs, we found a remarkable consistency in their personality, and it was all driven by a desire to be great from an internal drive, not because of accolades of the crowd. And so we were asked to give a quality assurance test to a major league team, and they wanted to see where they were against their benchmarks. So we took their team and we mapped them against their, the baseball benchmarks, the total benchmarks, and also broke their team out into their major leagues, their minors, and then the people that they had recently let go. And what's nice about this is it's a great starting point to understand if you're even in the right path, if there are areas that you need to explore further, and where there might be some bright spots that you can further enhance. We also ended up benchmarking them against two other teams that they thought had the representation of a talent identification that they would like to be measured against. So what are some of the business outcomes that we can immediately tie to? And one is when you have debiased qualitative metrics, you can immediately decide, you can eliminate 55%. In this case, we eliminated 55% off the top. So right away, you're targeting players that are more specifically going to be culture adds to your environment, but also have those character traits. And every team sort of uses different words. Some of them mean the same thing, some of them mean something differently. But this was able to identify for them, just based on the machine platform alone, not bringing in any performance statistics, who would be real solid picks for their environment. There was a set of outliers, and there's a graph there in a little bit that we'll get to, that help identify, okay, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so what do we do with all the people that sort of aggregate to a common average? The second thing that we looked at was we zoomed in and looked at a risk analysis. So if you're going to make a multi-million-dollar investment and someone could say, hey, let me make the reliability of that bet even better and reduce the risk on it, would you take that investment? And I think the answer for all of us would be yes. And so this is what that helps to do. In this case, the question was, hey, we've got two players that we're considering acquiring. Their performances, the strengths and weaknesses sort of net out. What can you tell us about them? And so what we're doing here is we're identifying for them the risk of bringing, not just comparing them, but the risk of bringing them into the environment so that they may prescriptively decide to have plans in place before things happen, or they can choose and say, you know what, this guy has some significant strengths. Let's identify what those strengths are and apply them intelligently internally to build things like teammateness, leadership, and really start to understand, how they can make the value of the acquisition greater than just the performance. The behavioral comparison, the edge here is really understanding your team holistically and understanding the network between the personalities of your team. So if you're looking at the dark blue bar and that represents the coach or coordinator that's responsible for the others, now you're able to understand and hone in on what's working, why we're building team chemistry, and how we can actually find things that are going great and apply them elsewhere, or understand if we're going to bring players in, how that might impact this balance. And it's totally understood that for a team or for a league like baseball, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more complex. So this is looking at different roles within that team and the coaches and coordinators as well. And it's also important when you're thinking about, like in the NHL, your forwards, right, and how they work together, and the idea of when you're moving players up and down a lot, really where the impact is and where you're going to feel it, and understanding how to address it before things happen, before someone starts to have an issue with pressure, have an issue with adversity, have an issue with a teammate. So when we're looking at the outliers, the fear is that you're going to mislabel talent or that you're going to miss it altogether. So what we did here is we took the players that, for them, looked like they were all in the same bunch, and we mapped out their personality profiles. And what we're able to understand here is who are the players that are going to be a culture add, not a culture fit, because that's not necessarily what you want, but who's going to be able to come in and not only contribute, but also gain and learn. So the idea of someone having that competitive will, the idea of someone being able to compete for the whole game, those are things that are really difficult to assess just when you're looking at performance and when you see them coinciding with so many other people. So what we're able to do here is really demonstrate statistically, where their personalities will emerge in those areas, and understand from a labor economic perspective if it's going to transfer internally. So you can be great in the minors, or are you going to be great in the majors? You can be great in college. Is that going to translate into the professional level? You can be amazing in New York. Does that mean you're going to be equally successful in Florida? So at the end of the day, we are building a platform for scouts that incorporates and takes into account all of the data feeds that's available that the team wants to include, not just the machine learning platform. So that when they're out in the field, they can receive real-time AI feedback that encourages them to look for those data gaps and go out and ask those right questions. We develop a qualitative interview and the questions not to take over what they're doing, but just to suggest and identify ways of asking questions differently and to get a story told versus just receiving an answer. And finally, it's looking at real-time data. So it's not something that you're processing and having to go back out in the field for. You can do it then once you process your data, once you input data. Some of the fields are standard. It's semi-structured so that we can sort of get that low-hanging fruit of data consistency, reliability, and having a longitudinal data set that has value. In the future, what we'd like to bake in is understanding that there's the physical, there's the psychological, but there's also the neurotransmitters for athletes that fire those nanoseconds faster. And they can make decisions faster, they're the right decisions, and they do it better than their competitors. And what's out there now, there's some really nice tools, but similar to some of the assessments, it's not completely recreating the environment. So you're missing some of the triggers of the external and internal variations that create anxiety, that create dealing with the pressure, that create that true environment of being under pressure in the moment. So we are exploring some ways to take that out of the equation as well. And finally, understanding the character traits that have ended athletes' careers early. So in this case, it's not necessarily looking to throw data out there to, throw another star in the sky and say, hey, can you still find the constellation? That's more of like a research opportunity to see if that makes sense to even include, if it's a strong signal or if it's going to be just noisy and it's interesting to think about. At the end of the day, the complete data set is really trying to create one nice big North Star. So when we're looking at what we're achieving from building in machine learning on the qualitative side is being able to identify in advance, target, put your resources where they count, and also internal resources, align them so that they can actually be prepared and do things on a preventative versus reactive nature. So at the end of the day, when we take a look at both the front and the back of the baseball card, we're not only providing insights and business outcomes for the team, we're looking at how do we look at players holistically as people. And by addressing them as people, you're going to be able to understand what are their motivators and how to consistently solicit the best maximum performance throughout their careers, and not just in the moment because they happen to be the hot player. We have time for questions. Anyone have any questions? Yeah, we gotta get the mic.
Thank you, Daphna. That was great. You mentioned that your model's built using words spoken or written from the players. So how do you account for differing kind of data sets across players? Because some are more vocal than others, or they are in a bigger market with more exposure.
No, it's a great question. So there's a couple questions in there. And the first is the technologies have actually gone through enough data sets where it's not about what's said, it's how it's said and how it's written. So it's analyzing and creating the validity across there, and we only need 300 words, 300 to 600 words spoken. So it's that reliable. In the case where there are athletes that may not have social media accounts, because it's all public information, we're not, one thing I should mention from a data privacy and ethical perspective, this isn't about going and fishing out things that are in a private account. This is all public access. So if there are athletes that are not on social media or haven't written a bunch, we engage with them via text and just asking a few questions, and it's very simple to get those words. And it doesn't even have to be me, it's really internal to the team, so it's a natural progression of their interaction with the team. Yeah, we have a question here.
Have you guys found that written versus, or there's a difference between written versus spoken words in terms of how effectively your algorithm or your model can characterize like the different personality types?
If I understand correctly, are you asking is there a difference between if we look at only written versus only spoken?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, they've been measured and they've been vetted the same. So we don't go and look for something specific. We could get 12,000 words for one person and 500 words for another, and it's going to be the same. And there's one question over here.
Sorry to make you come here. Thank you so much. I had a question about the point of culture add rather than culture fit.
Yeah.
And was curious about how you think through, is there like an optimal makeup of a team? Are there certain traits where all of the team members should be aligned versus other traits where it's better to have like a diversity in how you measure that?
That's a great question. I'm not really in the business of determining that for teams. I don't think I'm the best person. I don't think anyone from the outside is. I think that's GMs, that's owners, that's people determining the culture and understanding what the behaviors are. To me, culture is about virtues, it's behaviors, it's not just values. So if they're able to identify what those behaviors are, I can help them identify the athletes who have the tendencies for those behaviors or already exhibit them, and those who may not but actually have the potential to. So no, I haven't done any studies on that. I think as people evolve, as the game evolves, it's not necessary. It's a moving target. I have one question here. I should say that while we're getting the mic there, that the machine learning platform was leveraged from a corporate platform that was used for Fortune 500 companies for their CEO succession planning. So I've just spent like the last few years really maximizing it and making it adaptable for the sports environment. It's a bit different.
So you talked about making sure there aren't explicit biases in terms of player selection, but there's a popular anecdote of a tech company writing a similar algorithm to identify who would be the best engineers, and it ended up selecting one demographic segment. Have you looked into that? Any risk of that happening in your own models?
So if there's one benchmark and just sticking to that benchmark?
Basically, yeah. So they were looking to say who's the best performers, and then it ended up being that it had an implicit bias towards one segment of the demographic.
So then looking at if it's a specific race or gender or something. Mm-hmm. That's a great question. No, haven't had that problem. I think sports does not suffer from, or certain sports don't suffer from a lack of diversity. But what's interesting and what I am looking to do in the forward case studies is look at the data aggregated and understand if we can take the contextual environment and relationships and those influences and see trends there. So for example, to that point a little bit, players who come from overseas in Major League Baseball, they work hard, they bust their butt. However, there is a noticeable pattern of once they arrive, that they become complacent. It's a harsh generalization. I wouldn't say that's a majority by any means, but it's something that the teams have identified and want to understand better. So that's something that I would dive into, taking a pain point and understanding if we can really see reliable things that demonstrate it. But it really, really involves the social context as well, and that's why this is great. but building out the full qualitative model of understanding how these traits represent themselves and can express themselves in an environment is really, really important. One last question.
Just wondering how you handle possible discrepancies between your publicly available data that you're using to create these profiles for people that might have their publicly available data managed versus when you have a private interview with them and you're getting hopefully an unscripted answer from them.
Fair question. I think it's going to be more and more critical as people start to understand that their social profiles are being looked at. One is there's really not that much of a variation. However, we can instantaneously identify and get their 300 words once they're on the inside. I mean, they're not going to be drafted or chosen without some sort of verbal conversation. And that's when, again, it's the quality of that conversation and how they're answering their questions that we can validate it against. Right now, because I actually think it's happening now, I have not noticed that there's a variance. I'm not naive to the fact that that might change. So we're definitely working with organizations that are interested to do like reiterations and not just rely on like the first thing that comes out. And I think the second piece to that is there are athletes that have fake accounts and then they're real accounts. So it becomes more relevant and important to take it from the direct contact with the team themselves versus necessarily just the public available data. One question here.
Hello. I'd like to ask if you are taking context into account when you're running your algorithm. For example, some statements may come after a big win, a good individual performance. Mm-hmm. This is the one part. And the other, if you're taking into account silence after maybe a bad performance or mm-hmm. a bad team game.
It's a great question. The context is derived not just from the sports questions. It's not just from what they're saying after a game. It's throughout. It's who they are as people, as individuals. So even in that way, the natural language and IBM Watson has looked at the relationship between the words being used to determine if this is an extroverted, introverted context, and be able to look at the rest of the ocean profiles. I'm available if anyone wants to continue any parts of the conversation afterwards. I can be reached at daphna@besportsminded.com. I genuinely appreciate everyone being here and all of these really insightful, important questions. There were 2 recent studies that were just published. One was republished in Bloomberg Businessweek, and it was Australian researchers who looked at over 3,500 job fields and looked at the personality types that were in these job fields. And they noticed a remarkable consistency with the people in those jobs and their personalities. Their future state is to actually now go and look at the high performers in those jobs and understand from an employee perspective, if you have certain personality traits, where you might be able to transfer that skills between roles. So it's similar, it's happening, it's starting to be understood and identified. And the second real quick one is out of USC School of Medicine. Dr. Saxon just finished a really comprehensive study with the Marine Corps', their Green Beret and Black Berets. So this is like hardcore training, 25 volunteers, half of them get eliminated. And that half that gets eliminated, let's say it's 17, you've got half of those people who voluntarily quit. She looked at everything from nutrition to sleep to hydration to the physical to the mental. The only predictor that she could find of them selectively leaving was their personality. With 70% accuracy, she could do it. So while this seems sort of extreme and out there, because of machine learning, we're able to do it well. I think there's really good questions about how people are doing it, and that makes a huge difference, and if they're doing it ethically, of course. So thank you for your time.
Hey, hey. 1, 2, 2. Yeah, I've spent a lot of. I'm gonna reset this EQ. Hey. 1, 2, 2, 2. Check. 1, 2, 2, 2. 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2. Check. 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Hey, hey. 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2. 1, 2, 2. Check. 1, 2, 2, 1, 2.
All right. Thanks again for joining us here today at the 2020 Sloan Sports Analytics Conference Competitive Advantage Talks presented by Craft Analytics Group. My name is Matt Cabrera. I'm a second-year MBA student at MIT, and it's a pleasure for me to introduce today's talk, Rushing to Hockey Analytics, Hockey's Ability to Predict and Project Talent. Brought to you by Megan Chayka, the CEO and co-founder of Stathletes. So with that, I'll toss it over to Megan.
Appreciate it. Well, thank you. It's great to be here. And maybe I'll start off just because it kind of relates to something I'm wearing. Who remembers the drunk and the light post comment on a hockey panel? Who is that? Do you remember? Brian Burke. So my first ever panel I did was probably 7 years ago. And I was wearing my tag and I came off the stage. And he said, "Hey Megan, are you new? We all know who you are. You're wearing, you're talking in front of all these people." So I always have to take it off just because, it's like a superstitious thing. So with that said, we're going to go through a case study using multi-level models to estimate skater contributions. And I promise I'll try to make it fun. So before we get into that, we have to define what actually a rush shot is. So for a definition, an opportunity that occurs within 4 seconds of a controlled zone entry without the puck ever dropping below the goal line. So that's our definition for today that we're going to look at this model on. Kind of hockey. As we know, hockey is a very dynamic game. Typically in the past has been hard to quantify, but we're seeking to do a better job. Basically, Stathletes, we started about 12 years ago. My brother, who's now the youngest president GM in sports, and Neil Lane started just having fun with data. I guess a year after MIT Sloan conference started. And now we track in 22 leagues worldwide. And I heard earlier there wasn't a lot of public data for draft, but we actually have an extremely extensive draft database, and we track now and have clients in all these different levels. So hockey is definitely catching up in many different ways, and I'm happy to show you a bit more about that. So here's like event type data, just to give you a better picture of the type of data that's going into some of these models that we'll talk about further into this presentation. And you can see there's positives, negatives, there's deflections, there's different types of occurrences and events, sub-event types. You can see a play's made, received, moving ahead. There's someone missing coverage, so who's negatively detracting from a play. And and here's a 2D projection as well. All of our data that we'll be talking about today is 5-on-5, so even strength, and our objective is to evaluate individual contributions. So typically in the past, it's always looking at team level, but we really want to get down to that individual rush shot volume, which is pretty obvious, the amount, but also quality. So when you think of quality, you think of maybe soccer, expected goals. So looking everything into what creates these shot attempts and goal scoring chances, both offensively and defensively. We're going to focus on offense because I think that's a bit more exciting for people. But defensively is interesting too because in the past that hasn't been as quantified. So the more data that you collect, the more tracking data you have, the more you're able to understand the defensive side. And especially, we want to provide measures of uncertainty. So if a researcher or someone that's up on this podium is doing perhaps a marketing type talk, presents point estimates without associated standard errors, they're either being lazy, it happens, or deceitful, which we don't want to do in the talk today. And this will be 3 years of NHL data in complete observations. So we also want to know how wrong we are. So without understanding how uncertain we are, we fail to determine if measured differences in our statistics are meaningful. Even worse, we tend to be overconfident in our results and could actually increase our risk in decision making. So if the top-ranked skater and an average skater have confidence bounds that significantly overlap in a given performance, we cannot make a substantial claim about the former. We need standard errors to be able to tell when we are dealing with an arbitrarily ranked list of names. So if you see media and you're like, I wonder why that player is so high.
So the fact is we need to motivate them by feeling and not by doing. And I know that's really a pedestrian statement, but it's something that we really need to drum all the time. So this is kind of what my, I would say day, but like life sometimes looks like. So I work directly with athletes. I do get brought in by teams. I work with preseason sort of camps and training and that kind of stuff. But one thing I do is I spend 2 hours with an athlete in a closed door situation, computer, there is no document with their name on it. Even my phone doesn't have phone numbers with names in it. They're all code words. If I'm messaging other people in my team, their name never comes up at all. So we do a 100-question onboarding. It's about 120. It takes 2 hours. It's just myself or one individual and that athlete. And it is really just to figure out like who they are, what they love, what they hate, what things they're interested in, where the bodies are buried, who knows where the bodies are buried, if anyone's trying to dig up the bodies, if someone might dig up the bodies tomorrow. All those things are definitely come up, okay? But it's the beginning of trust, essentially. And then my day is I do a daily scan, and as we know, athletes like to, they go to work at they're working is about 7 p.m. usually for most of the athletes in North America. So when they're getting up at around 11:30 to 1:30, having their breakfast, then I'll send out a text and say, hey, how are you doing today? What are you feeling like? Yeah, last night's game was crappy, or it was great, or something happened, or something came out in the news, or where their head is kind of at. We also do monthly analytics. We do communication strategy, obviously. That's our end result, but that could be with a larger team. I don't actually create a post generally. They usually have their own sort of people that do that, but I sort of help direct that. And then we launch and test. And that's the bit where I go, I don't know what's going to happen. Could be good, could be bad. But we'll test it and we'll see, and we'll figure out whether we had a clue or not. Because I don't care who you are, how much experience you've had, how many things you've dealt with, you have no clue what's going to happen. Because I guarantee you might have the best laid plans, and guess what? Tomorrow happens when you post it and you give someone the blessing to post it, and at that time something else happens in the world, and all of a sudden that takes on a completely different meaning, and then you've got a whole other ball of flames to put out, right? So I want to get into some more interesting things. So one of the things we do is benchmarks, and I use a tool called Meltwater, and you can use whatever you like. I've used other tools. What I like about Meltwater is it's, I always feel like analytics tools have these made up sort of data congestions or traffic clogs or whatever, where they mishmash all these numbers and they call it something that they kind of proprietary name it. And so I'm always a little kind of skeptical about that because I don't like numbers. So one thing that I liked about Meltwater is they let me go back 18 months, and then I can take a chunk of time that's like 12 months of that, and I can develop benchmarks. Because the wonderful thing about sport, unlike really any other industry, because every other industry is what Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 repeat. But what's cool about sport is you have preseason, which we're in now with MLB, preseason training camps, and then we have the season, and then depending on the sport, you might actually have race series or competitions like in rugby league. Go the All Blacks. So you have all these things, and then you have however your sport finishes up that season. So it could be whether it's a grand final, or it could be a World Series if it's baseball, or you get the picture, right? So, but those are all repeatable conditions that we can look at. So one of the things that I do is I have all these different benchmarks. This is what it looks like in real life. But here's what I call them. So where someone's traded, obviously that's a trade, where Mookie got traded. And, where there's, Michael Vick, there's kind of like, and also the sign stealing, I actually call those a wholly S bleep benchmark. And then we have things where it's like, there's the Special Olympics, and there was kind of some kind of good feely kind of stuff. So it's like a good news day. And then you also have wins and losses as well. So you're going to make up your benchmarks for whatever they are. So it could be your seasons, and then you're also going to have these moments. It could be a legal issue, a holy kind of bleep issue, whatever it may be. So then you're going to look at your single event benchmark, right? So you're going to understand what impacts a brand and what recovery looks like. The recovery part, very, very important, but also when we look at these things, this is sort of plucked out of the sky from somebody, and they have a really good reputation. I always work with people that call me at 2 a.m., but I work with people that are like looking at things over a longer period of time and trying to look at improving. And our goal is to build what we call a resilient brand, because I know that something will happen to every athlete at some point, whether it be an injury or something happens around them or they do something themselves. So what we see here is our positive and negative. I usually do it as a ratio. That's not too bad, 60-40. It's not fantastical, but you can see that they've actually enjoyed some pretty good days there. That's each bar is a day. But then something wicked happened that really negatively impacted them. The other thing you got to think about when you're, especially with sports and your data and looking at reputation, is there's some definite bad days, like spots in there, but that could be somebody going, so-and-so really sucked last night in the game, right? Because they like the other team. So not everybody that gets pulled into your analytics is your fans, but they're definitely your audience, and they're definitely talking about you. So what we look at is what happened there, what specifically caused that drop, how long does it take to recover? Did you make it better or worse, essentially? And, what does it naturally return to? Because what we're trying to do is build that resilient brand. So you have this good ratio, and it's kind of somewhat equal to positive and negative. Does anyone look at sentiment now? Do you guys look at reputation now and your content strategies? Just lie and someone say yes. Good, there you go, see? Taught somebody to lie today. Just kidding. So what is the reason for that drop? And basically, it's a shift in your fan base. I call that your herd. Todd knows we grew up in New Zealand, not together, we're not brother and sister. But one thing happens in New Zealand is there's sheep farms everywhere. And, you've all watched it where the dogs are trying to herd them in. So it's kind of what happens is you're trying to herd your fan base into the right place, and then somebody runs over there, and then the rest of them run over there, and they all join that bandwagon. Especially from Toronto, that is the land of bandwagon fans. If you watched the Raptors win the championship last year, everybody's a Raptors fan. So, but that'll change and everyone will flip around. So what we're always trying to do is figure out, why did it drop? Was it because somebody misunderstood some quote or something that was said? Was it twisted in some way because, a journalist wanted to gain some sort of eyeballs or something? So you're going to have to figure that out and then figure out if it's a topic that's important to your fan base, which is going to be forgotten tomorrow. So then we have a 4 or an 8-week close benchmark. This could be a race series if it's like Formula One. It could be preseason camps. It could be finals of a competition or something like that. Why I think it's good is because each of these bars is a week. So we're sort of getting into longer periods of time. And you can see everything started out really great. I'm a little suspicious of that 100%. I'm not sure about you. Pretty sure there were some bad things in there. And it ended up pretty great. But in the middle, it turned a little sour during camp. But was that because it's if it was a preseason camp, they'd get asked all this stuff? Or if it was a race series, you've got your driver, your sponsor, and your race series. So it's not Lewis Hamilton. He's not a client of mine, but I use this as an example because, this could be him, and it could look like he did something really bad or said something really bad, but when you actually look at it, it was Mercedes made some sort of a change to something, or there was a sponsorship contract talk that went on. And so, or it could be the F Formula One race, something happened there. So when you get into some of these analytics programs, with Meltwater especially, you can click on that red and it will then show you all those documents. And you can see you didn't really get rid of some stuff real well, so you kind of take those out and then you can kind of look at it again. So that's where we're at with that, looking at this. So again, what drove it down? Is it an event or unreal? Often when we have things, we go, wow, everyone was really happy in the beginning, and then we disappointed them, and then we somehow came back. So we kind of look at what the story is around that. Also look at other athletes in your team, if it's a team. Look at other athletes in that kind of position. Like, is it something to do with, say it's pitches, or is it something to do with positions or certain things? Did a study come out on concussion that says, these athletes that play this position get more head injuries, and all of a sudden there's all this negative talk and your athlete's getting dragged through all that conversation. So this is why I don't like numbers, because numbers don't tell stories. Okay, so really looking at that. So what is your content piece that you need to develop? So what you're here to figure out is, what should people know about next preseason? Because remember how I said we do benchmarks because time constantly repeats. So, okay, we just looked, like maybe you got, you came on board and you started looking at this and it's in the middle of an actual season, and you go back and you go, well, what happened in preseason? And people go, I don't really care about that. We don't have to worry about that for a while. It's like, yeah, but I want to start building a story because we know that this is what happens when we go into preseason. We know that these athletes face this kind of negative talk. What can we do to start explaining and laying stories so that when the next preseason comes, we're ready? And that's something that's valuable for you if you're in a team, if you're a sponsor, if you're sponsoring particular athletes that are maybe a little tougher to handle. So who's supposed to be involved? What's that content going to look like? I work, when I develop content, on a thing that we call perceptions to knowledge to trust. There is no such thing as loyalty. I don't care if your company has a loyalty card, it doesn't matter. We can talk more about that afterwards, but the point about it is, someone has a perception about you. Is it a fact or is it a perception? What is the knowledge piece that your audience is going to swallow and digest and possibly believe or accept? Because you're not trying to convince people of anything. We're just trying to get them to accept and understand. And so that's the other part, if you take something away from today, we're not trying to change anyone's mind. We're just trying to get them to understand a point of view. They don't have to agree with it. So, and in season, what I want you to see about this is, looks kind of fine. 51 of 49, survey says, pretty good. But I actually know that this is not actually a really good story behind these numbers. And so you kind of have to be very careful when you start to stretch things out. Those bars are weeks. Now we're looking over an entire season. You show that to somebody upstairs, it looks like everybody's happy. But they were not. But what you can look at is that when it sinks down, it kind of does rebound back up again. That kind of happened. So you've got to be really careful at what you're looking at. So you've got to ask if you can trust this metric, this sort of a KPI kind of feel. But what I'm always looking for, what is that natural rebound pattern? Win benchmarks, I'm going to flip through this pretty quickly. And just the point of this one, you can do wins and losses. Depending on your sport and your athlete, you're going to put some buffers around this, because it's not about what happens on the day of that win. It's what happened a few days before and a few days after. Now, if you're a sport that gets a new game happens every 3 days or 2 days, you know that you've got to kind of figure out what that padding is going to look like. But if you've got an athlete that only plays every 4 days because of the position they play, you can probably do 2 or 3 days on either side. But what's interesting is, very similar, 67% to 33 on both. You show someone that number, looks good. But then you show them the second one and you're like, whoa, what happened? So really figuring that out, and again on this one that I use, you can click on there and really see what it is that you're doing. So this one's super interesting because this is real-time stuff. Like, we follow things in real time as it's happening. This is a sort of athlete media directed thing. So this is a situation where you have like a journalist writes an article and says something and takes a quote, and it's not pretty. So I've had multiple situations like this. And what I always have said, and I don't think it's backfired at all yet, is you're sending that out. You're going to retweet that, or you're going to push that out again, and you're actually going to explain like what it is you meant. And they're like, but I have way more reach than that blogger, journalist, sometimes even the whatever channel it's going out on. Why would I put that out there? That's like not nice. I go, because you're going to write what you mean, what you meant. You were misquoted, you were cut off, whatever it may be. And you can see that, and this is within hours. There's actually the first dots are day 1, the second dots are day 2, because I can't cut it down into hours, but I watched it happening. And within 5 hours in the middle, like in nighttime, like that changed from a little bit negative, but more negative than positive, to happy days. So that's something that was kind of a neat thing. But then you have a cluster. And that's where things just start to go good, or they start to go bad, or you think they're going good, and then you make a decision. Sometimes it pays off, sometimes it doesn't. So what does that look like? So when I have this, I like to present it as a line graph like I did before, because then I can see these points and I can actually see that flow of following a good day and following like good stuff and following the bad stuff. You can still click on it, you can still see all the documents. So the first thing was an athlete-directed online event. So something was either written about them or they posted something that didn't get received real well. So you can see that you have obviously the negative is better than the higher, rather not better, but higher than the positive one. What's cool is that what you're looking for here is what happens after the bad thing. So each dot is a day. So it does actually kind of go back in its natural form is to go back to that little bit more positive. But then there was something that happened in the game. So let's say their performance wasn't very good. If it was a hockey game, it might have been like a really high stick or a bad sort of move, or someone got smacked into the boards, or something happened, not so grand. And then you see that's negative, but it does go back to positive, and it goes back a little bit better because there's been work being done. But in this case, because it was so much negative talk, I did say, and I rarely ever say this, put your phone down. Do not touch it for 24 hours. Let's just, because anything you do, it's so vile and toxic out there, anything you do is going to come back. And even nice things, you could post kitty cats, and it's going to be bad. So just stay off it. Then there was a team-directed thing that happened. It wasn't necessarily bad, it wasn't great, but it was just a neutral thing. But it gave us an opportunity to tell a story that was kind of like an audience fan kind of, thing, we'll say. So we produced this, put it out there, and you can see that it got a lot of take up. So it got retweeted, it got talked about, it was great. Then they had a game didn't go so well. But what's cool about this is you can actually see that over the period of about a week or so, I can't count, but like a week and a half, you can see that, yes, some bad stuff happens in events, but each time it's getting a little bit more positive and a little bit more positive. But I can bet you that sponsors, the team, the audience are going, oh man, that person's bad news. Like, just stay away. Like, we're not gonna try writing sponsorship contracts at this point, or it just looks so bad. Because people do, they believe all the negative stuff, right? So that is, but when you look at it this way, you can actually see, and you can actually see where you're making good decisions and bad decisions. And those are those negative points. So the main takeaways are, for reputational data is you identify content opportunities that would otherwise be missed. It really is this pulse of what's truly happening. And you can see this performance, like how satisfied people are, because it's funny how people like to tell athletes whether they're good or not is also whether they like them or not, right? Like, you can have a play that's stellar, but I don't like you, so you played terribly. So that kind of comes out. It also, you get to learn every day about their personality and their sort of personal traits of the athlete, of the brand and the fans, everybody. And you figure out what that tone is. That's really, really important. And you figure out what the perceptions are. Perceptions, not facts. What people think about something and about you. Those things are gold. And I guarantee you that a reputational-led strategy is more impactful than if you're just thinking about engagement. Nobody in this room is dealing with anybody that needs more engagement. That comes while they're sleeping. They could post nothing, and we have big athletes. I mean, we talked, Kwai was mentioned earlier, that don't even have social media, but they are talked about all the time. So reputation is short and long term, but engagement is only short term, and you give your audience more relatable substance, something to bite into. And it's fine if people don't like you. You sort of figure out what are the topics, what are the things to talk about. So that's what I got. We've got 1 minute and 36 seconds left. I know you only understood half of it because Todd taught me to talk funny. Todd taught me to talk. That's too hard. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to find a mic and ask those. I'll try my best to answer them. I'll also be available afterwards as well, if anyone wants to ask anything. So, has anyone got anything gripping they want to find out? Yes. Oh. Okay. I can ask. You can ask me at the back. Yeah. Hi.
Hi. I'm just wondering, since you referenced Kawhi, how would you measure or evaluate his reputation when he doesn't actually have social media?
So well, he doesn't have social media, but he's on social media.
Yeah. So just using alternative data sets?
Yeah. So what we use is we have two forms: editorial and social. Editorial is obviously TV, newspaper, all those traditional means of media. And social is Reddit, blogs, Instagram stories, or whatever, or Instagram, whatever they let us have these days. Facebook, Twitter, like the obvious ones. So yeah. So there's stuff out there. He's just not participating. There's one thing that I'm often quoted of saying is, if you're not building your brand, the media and the trolls are. If you're happy with that, then go for it. But you should be building it yourself. All right. Thank you very, very much. I'm happy to meet anyone outside.
Get up and sit down quickly. That'd be appreciated. Welcome to the 2020 Sloan Sports Analytics Conference Competitive Advantage Talks, presented by Kraft Analytics Group. My name is Todd Anster, and I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan. I'm excited to launch the next presentation, F1 and Sustainability. Please join me as we welcome our next speaker to the stage, Miles Lowry, Strategy and Business Development at Formula One.
Cheers, Todd. Thank you very much. Just before we jump into it, can I get a quick show of hands of how many people here have seen our Drive to Survive Netflix series? That's pretty good, actually. Yeah, I like that. Nice. So for those who don't know, Series 2 just launched. It's an amazing behind-the-scenes series behind all of Formula One last season during 2019. So what I'm here to talk to you about today, F1 and our sustainability strategy. So, in recent years, decarbonisation and sustainability has been, an increasingly hot topic amongst current affairs. And so what we've done here is there's an expectation now for major corporations to have a defined strategy in terms of their approach to sustainability. You might have seen that most of the airline companies recently, such as EasyJet, Finnair, and AIG, have come out with what their stance is on sustainability. Microsoft recently confirmed their intention to go carbon negative. So it's become more and more on corporations to have this responsibility and what is their approach to sustainability. So before I jump into it, just got a quick video to show you now. As you can see, pretty exciting stuff. So we wanted to be bold with our sustainability plan. But people might be asking, why did we actually come out publicly and state what our sustainability strategy is? First and foremost, it's the right thing to do. As I mentioned, sustainability has become an increasingly hot topic amongst current affairs. And as a major corporation, we felt that we had a major responsibility to be one of the key drivers of change. Second, improved brand perception. So I guess Formula One has kind of been historically perceived as kind of the child of the internal combustion engine and probably as a non-green sport. And so what we hope from being very public with our strategy and with our goals is that we can hopefully change that perception and also kind of bust a few myths along the way. Third, attract a younger and more diverse fan base. Naturally, as a commercial rights holder, we all want to increase our fan base. And one of the key demographics for us is the Gen Z fan base. So as part of that, some studies have shown that the Gen Z fan base are more attracted to corporations that stand for a particular cause. And we know that one of those causes in particular is sustainability. Fourth, greater commercial attractiveness. Now, we all know how important sponsorship and commercial partnerships are in terms of the world of sports organizations. And now, we'll be frank and say that we've had a number of conversations with both prospects and existing partners, and sustainability has been a key topic of discussion. Now, we previously had a clear lack of story, but we hope that through our sustainability strategy, we'll be able to kind of work with our partners and having an aligned vision of where we want to take the sport. And finally, showcase the potential of the hybrid engine and sustainable fuels. Formula One is commonly perceived around the world as being one of the most innovative and technologically driven sports in the world. We hope that through our sustainability strategy, we'll be able to communicate that message in terms of what we're able to do in terms of driving the future of the automotive industry. So this is all nice, but what does this actually mean, and what is actually our strategy? So this is a summary of our environmental sustainability strategy. So as you can see, we've got two key pillars. On the left-hand side, we've got countdown to zero. So our goal to be a net carbon neutral sport by 2030. And on the right-hand side, positive race print. And what we mean by that is for all of our events, not just our races, to be sustainable events by 2025. So first, focusing on the countdown to zero, what we're going to do is first we'll have a look at what Formula One's carbon footprint stands at today. So as you can see, Formula One's carbon footprint during 2019 was 257,000 tons. Now that's not just Formula One itself, that also includes the teams and also our major suppliers. And as you can see, the main two areas of that, the bottom left-hand side in terms of logistics and also our business travel. And what we mean by that is getting all of our equipment and all of our personnel to our races. So that's involved in terms of transporting everything that we have around the globe to 21 races annually. Now, to give you a bit of context of that, Formula One itself transports around 250 tons of equipment around the world to each race. When you include both the teams and our partners, that number increases to 800 tons. But to me, that's actually probably not the most interesting thing about this slide, and actually it's the top left-hand corner, the power unit emissions, which actually is less than 1%. So that's the carbon footprint from the impact of our cars going around the track during the whole year is less than 1%. And that's a massive perception difficulty that we have to change for Formula One. So how are we going to address that? How are we going to get down to that zero by 2030? So our strategy is comprised of 4 key pillars: on the track, on the move, where we work, and balance to zero. Now on the track, as you previously saw, that's less than 1% of our carbon footprint, but actually it's quite fundamental for what we stand as a sport. So how are we going to go about reducing that? Well, what we want to do is have net zero carbon race cars by 2030. And how we're going to do that is 1, through our hybrid engine, and 2, through sustainable fuels. So Formula One's, not a lot of people know this, but our hybrid engine today has about a thermal efficiency of over 50%. To put that into context, you compare that to the most elite road cars of today that operate at just over 30% thermal efficiency. And in terms of sustainable fuels, so our approach is by 2030 that we want to have all of our cars powered by sustainable fuels, whether that be biofuels, second-generation biofuels, such as, for examples, as algae, or whether they be new synthetic fuels. Now, normally the question that I get at this point in time, someone puts a hand up and says, what about electric? Now, naturally it's a question, and we're completely open and we understand that electric is going to be one of the drivers toward decarbonisation in the future. But our view is that there's not just going to be one source of influence during that period. And we also think that although there's going to be some benefits to using electric power, for example, in metropolitan and major cities, actually there are most forms of transportation, such as freight, aeroplane, and lorries, that actually aren't able to use electric at this point in time. And so there are going to be alternative uses of fuels used. Just to kind of give you an example from a study, so it was shown that the estimate is 14% of newly purchased road cars by 2030 are expected to be powered by electric batteries. So that means 86% are still expected to be powered by thermal combustion engines. Second, going into on the move, and this relates back to the 45% here of our logistics. So what we actually mean by that is how can we reduce that impact of all of the equipment that we ship around the world? There's 3 main ways you can do that. 1, you ship less stuff. 2, you ship it shorter distances. And 3, you ship it more efficiently. And so what we mean by shipping it less stuff, so for example, that means that we might increase our amount of remote operations. And what we mean by that is for each of our races, we transport all of our ability to produce the international feed that is distributed globally for our television broadcast. What we tested recently in testing for this year was doing that remotely back in our base in London, and we're hopefully going to increase that level of operations throughout the season. Secondly, in terms of efficient shipping stuff lesser distances. So currently our calendar is semi-regionalized, but not completely. So for example, next weekend, our season opener in Australia. We also have our kind of middle of the season in Europe, around circa May to September, and then we end in the Middle East in Abu Dhabi. What we hope to do over time is gradually create a regionalized calendar where we'll have, for example, the Asia leg of the series, the Americas leg of the series, European, Middle East, etc. And in terms of shipping stuff more efficiently, so currently we balance a lot of our equipment between shipping it via aeroplane or via boats. Now, naturally, there's a demand for equipment during the race weekend that needs to be there immediately in the shortest amount of time. But what we try to do as much as possible is to ship our equipment via freight, which is a lot more efficient. So what we're hoping to do over time is through successful planning is to increase that ratio. Third, where we work. Now, what we mean by this is having all of our facilities, both Formula One, the teams, and our suppliers, having all our facilities being powered by 100% renewable energy. And for example, how we're going to do that, an example of this is actually with our Formula One offices ourselves, where by the end of this year, we're going to be entering into carbon purchasing agreements. And what that means is that our suppliers are going to be guaranteeing that they'll be invested in renewable energy for our buildings. And finally, balance to zero. Now, if we achieve all that I've mentioned there, the best that we can hope to achieve is a 50% reduction in our carbon footprint, which itself is a pretty good amount. But naturally, though, what that means is, one, we will have to take some level of offsetting, and two, we'll also have to do some carbon sequestration. Now, what we mean by that is literally sucking carbon out the air. Now, the normal way that organizations go about that is through planting an increased number of trees. But another way you can do that is the development of new technologies. And Formula One, through our experience in engineering and R&D, hope that we can be one of the driving forces in terms of the development of new technologies to do so. Now going on to the right-hand side, in terms of our positive race sprint. Now, as I previously alluded to, what that means is making all of our events sustainable by 2025. So now we already have all of our races around the world. We host 21 races across 5 continents. We also host, for example, fan festivals. So this year we've got a fan festival in Johannesburg, we've got one in New York, and we're also going to have one in London. And we want all of those events to be sustainable. So first and foremost, it's what we use. And what we want to do is have all the materials that we use to be sustainable and for all waste to be reused, whether that be recycled, reused, or composted. Now, exactly how we're going to do that is collaborating with our promoters and the people that put on these events. And that starts with our first race in Australia next weekend. And so, for example, what we're going to be doing is completely removing single-use plastics from our race, and also other initiatives such as, so for example, all of the accreditation that you will receive when you attend a Formula One race will be made from recycled plastics, from your pass to your lanyard, etc. The next objective in terms of to the race. Now, what we mean by that is in terms of our individuals attending our Formula One events. Now, the number that I previously referred to in terms of the 257,000 tons, that excluded the impact from our fans attending our events. Now, if you do include our fans, that number increases to 1.9 million. Now, I know that number sounds quite big, but actually if you can benchmark that versus other events, so for example, the FIFA World Cup has a carbon footprint of 2.5 million, and also, for example, the Olympics has a carbon footprint of 4.9 million. So actually, relative to our peers, it's relatively low. And the rationale behind that is because we have a surprisingly high number of our attendees from the local countries and local communities. So how are we going to planning to reduce that? So there's 3 key ways. One, we can work with the promoters to support the use of public transport. 2, we can incentivize the use of more environmentally friendly transport, whether that be the use of bicycles, hybrid engines, or electric cars. And then finally, it's when our attendees at the point of ticket purchase, do they want to opt into the option to partially offset their journey and travel through carbon offsetting? Third, where we watch. And what we mean by this is making all circuits and facilities the better for the well-being and nature. And so examples of this might include, so for example, Formula One, we're very fortunate that I guess we follow the sun essentially around the globe. Now, that has its natural advantages for its attendees, but also has some circumstances that we need to be aware of. And so, for example, again, I refer to some of our events this year. What we're doing is collaborating with our promoters to ensure that 1, sufficient shade is available to all attendees, 2, that hydration points are also available, and 3, that we're also making sunscreen fully available. And if you also think about, for example, what we're doing with in terms of the biodiversity, we're also collaborating with some of our races. So, for example, our event in Canada is hosted in a park in Montreal. Australia is also hosted in a park. And Barcelona has our own natural nature reserve. So what we're going to be doing is collaborating with our promoters to ensure that they are investing in terms of maintaining that biodiversity in terms of where we race. And finally, with our hosts. So when Formula One normally goes to an event, we're approximately there for kind of 2 to 3 weeks, and then we leave. So naturally, that has the biggest impact on the local community. So what we want to do is ensure that Formula One has a lasting legacy on the venues that we visit. So how are we going to do that? 1, working to ensure that local members of the community attend our events. Examples of this include, for example, in Australia, where our plan is during Thursday and Friday for 35,000 school children to attend the event for free during Thursday and Friday. Another example of this might be where we collaborate more with local suppliers and local businesses. And so, for example, in our provision of our F&B and our merchandise, that's where we try to kind of maximize and ensure that we're kind of that collaboration with the local businesses. So that's just a summary of kind of the 2 key pillars. I guess the question is, where are we today and kind of what are the next steps? So, as you can see, our mission from our sustainability strategy is to unleash the greatest sustainable racing spectacle on the planet. Now, we announced this strategy in November 2019. It's publicly available for all people to download from our corporate website. And it's received an extremely positive response from all of our partners, whether that be the teams, our commercial partners, promoters, and sponsors. Some of you might have seen that Mercedes, following our sustainability strategy, also released their own motorsport sustainability strategy for both their Formula One and Formula E business. And so we've got the buy-in from our key stakeholders, and now it's about going about and executing. And so what we're doing is going about and ensuring that we implement the correct foundations so that we can attempt to achieve our ambitious goals by 2025 and 2030. So you might have seen in the slides that we had these foundations going across the bottom. So we're going to go about the process ensuring responsible sourcing, transparency in reporting, environmental compliance, and health and well-being. So I guess it's a very exciting time to be at Formula One. This strategy is extremely bold, and when we talk to people and talk about the targets that you will have seen, people ask, this is very ambitious, how are you going to achieve this? But we hope that by being public and transparent with our objectives, that our head's on the chopping board essentially, and we have to achieve these goals, and we're going to be working with all of our various stakeholders to make sure that we get through and reach those levels. So thank you very much for your time. Any questions? Thank you. Microphone is on the way around.
All right, thank you. You mentioned and spoke quite a bit about how you're working with your different corporate partners in Formula One to ensure that you reach the sustainability goal. Have you gotten any backlash from perhaps some of your corporate partners in the fossil fuel industry or other industries that support the use of carbon fuels?
That's a completely valid question, and I'd actually say more the opposite. We've had a number of, naturally Formula One in the nature of the industry that we operate in, we do have a number of industries that are more related to the fossil fuels, but actually are similarly aware of these problems and looking to transition more towards that kind of sustainability approach. And we hope that, I guess, people would increasingly know that the nature of commercial partnerships is changing. And so we're going to be working now with our partners to see if we can collaboratively come to a solution. I mentioned the kind of creation of new synthetic fuels. And so, for example, with our oil partners or liquid or lubricant partners, can we start to look at alternative solutions that can reduce our reliance on fossil fuels?
Hi. So just to tack onto that point, a large part of Formula One and your team's models is sponsorship. Do you envision building requirements for sponsors if they want to get in the game of sponsoring teams or Formula One to meet certain sustainability requirements as well?
So in terms of all of our relationships with our partners, so for example, we are starting to incorporate kind of requirements. And you mentioned sponsors there, particularly with our promoters. In our new agreements, we're asking all of our promoters to sign up to agreements in terms of these are the sustainability standards that we want to meet. And we're going about a process now in terms of grading our promoters in terms of where they meet in terms of our current sustainability levels and in terms of helping them to migrate further towards those standards. In terms of our commercial partners, it's something that we're very kind of actively having those conversations in terms of we set these targets, how can we work together to achieve that? And an ideal example might be someone like a Heineken, which is one of our kind of biggest and most prosperous relationships in terms of, okay, how can we work together to help to kind of change that perception of both of our brands in terms of, yes, we're fully aware of our environmental impact and what can we do to improve and change that?
Hi. I think this is a wonderful initiative. Only hypothetical downside I can think of is the lack of sound, because fans enjoy the engine sound and the steering sounds. But when it's a complete switch to electrical vehicles, for example, there is lack of. So how do you combat that? And second question is, what other downsides can you think about and what are the mitigants that you have?
So what I will say is that our intention is not to go to electric-powered vehicles. And as I mentioned, our intention is to leverage our existing and improve our hybrid engine and then also alternative fuels. So but they will be net zero carbon fuels, so whether they're synthetic or biofuels. Now, on our view, is that will not have an impact on the sound and the atmosphere that's created kind of the whole Formula One spectacle.
Hey Miles, I actually grew up in Melbourne, so right around the Grand Prix, so I really appreciate getting to hear all about the initiatives, especially in Australia. Kind of on a similar question, how exactly do you work with the teams and try and incentivize them making hybrid or cleaner engines a really important objective, and how do they trade that off against performance if that's something they have to do?
So that's an interesting question, and I kind of take that separately in terms of from the technical side and then also in terms of from, I guess, the commercial side. And first of all, starting on the commercial side, we have a increasingly great relationship with the teams, despite what might seem publicly. And so every year we go around and we speak to the teams and we present to them in terms of the commercial initiatives that we've got planned. And our sustainability strategy has been one of the best received initiatives that we've had. And the reason for that is because we're both in the same boat. Both of us are looking to attract new commercial partners, and sustainability is constantly a question that they're getting. And so the fact that Formula One as a commercial organization has a strategy, and then also the teams, we're working in them in terms of collaboration, in terms of what they can do as well. So that's from the commercial side. And then in terms of from the technical and the motorsport side, so our role as the rights holder and increasingly so with our new motorsports division, we're currently in the stages of finalizing our latest Concord agreement for the 2021 season, where we'll be modifying the technical regulations. And then what we'll be doing is working to then modify for our next Concord agreement in terms of how can we incorporate some of these initiatives in terms of, for example, increasing the efficiency of our engine, or in terms of the fuels that are used to power and source that engine.
My question is, with logistics being
the biggest impact on the footprint, you mentioned that the goal was to reduce the entire carbon emissions by about 50%. So how do you guys plan, and is there a goal for the logistics to get into the 20s?
In terms of percentage?
Yes.
Well, so I think those the three key initiatives that we talked about. I think one of the biggest one is in terms of how we ship our, one, the amount of freight, and two, how we ship it. So, I refer to our remote operations. Currently, what we do for each of our races, we physically transport around a broadcast center to each of our races, and that produces the world feed that is then distributed to each of our broadcasters. Now, if we can actually produce that show back at base and then only have to set up the minimal infrastructure around the circuit, that for starters will have a massive impact on our footprint. Also, in terms of the amount of personnel, you might have seen for 2020 and 2021, we're making slight modifications to the plan for the weekend in terms of the number of days and commitment. What we hope that will do is reduce the number of people that actively go to a Formula One race for each of the teams during the weekend. And in terms of how we ship our equipment, I mentioned, for example, that trade-off between both air freight and sea freight. So, for example, what we normally do is we actually have, for example, 2 sets of the exact same equipment, and what we'll do is they'll overlap one another. But what we can do is actually, if we can invest, for example, it might be more efficient or more equipment, but then what we'll actually be able to do is transport that in a more efficient way, rather than, for example, 2 fleets of aeroplanes kind of overlapping each other. It might be, for example, that we increase that, say, for example, to 4 sets of kit, but they're actually transported via freight. So again, that'll have a big impact. Any other questions?
Hi.
Hey.
So usually sustainability and sustainable causes are seen as a big cost for companies and leagues, but a few companies have notably had examples where being sustainable can actually save them money in the long run. So have you found any ways that being more sustainable and greener can actually drive profitability, or are you still looking for ways to do so, or is it just a cost?
I think that, I can't remember who said it recently, but they said that the most important thing to achieve and improve sustainability is to make it profitable for companies and be willing to invest in. I think that, we already alluded to the fact that it might be not directly profitable to invest in sustainability, but I actually think that almost the opposite, and the opportunity cost of not invested in sustainability is going to could have a negative long-term impact on businesses. And so hence there is an incentive for companies to invest. Now, there are also technology solutions, and increasingly, there are companies popping up with more efficient solutions. An example was, a few weeks ago we met with a water supplier who's going to start providing water fountains at a number of our circuits around the calendar. Now, we've found a company that can do that extremely cost efficiently. Now, there might be slight increases versus having kind of non-reusable plastics, but actually sometimes there is going to be a cost, and if we do want to achieve these targets, then that's something that Formula One's going to have to forbear.
Thank you.
Cool, great. Well, thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate it.